we've been missing. 2 minutes to go. 2 minutes to go. They call them tall boys, but they make me feel small. Remind me of a time in the past. Oh, how the moments fly so fast. 2 minutes to go. 2 minutes to go. They call them tall boys, but they make me feel small. Remind me of a time in the past. Oh, how the moments fly so fast. 2 minutes to go. 2 minutes to go. I'm gonna salt this rim and pour a beer to the brim. Use the taste buds he gave to savor the flavors he made. 2 minutes to go. 2 minutes to go. I'm gonna salt this rim and pour a beer to the brim. Use the taste buds he gave to savor the flavors he made. 2 minutes to go. 2 minutes to go.
Good evening and welcome to the Tryanuary Beer School and live tasting. Jake, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm very good, thank you.
I'm quite proud of myself for doing one of the most childish things I've ever done in making an AI song for saying 2 minutes to go to the Tryanuary tasting. I did that about 20 minutes ago, really rushing as well, but there we go.
Yeah, it's good. It's very good.
Jake, welcome to your Siren live debut. How are you feeling about it?
Yeah, looking forward to it. It's good to have something to do on a Thursday evening in winter, isn't it? So
yeah, amen. Do you want to introduce yourself? Tell the good people who you are.
Yeah, my name's Jake. I'm the lead brewer at Siren. I've been in the role about 18 months now.
Yeah.
And so I look after the production team and the packaging team. So helping day-to-day stuff, making sure that we're making good work every day. We're looking after the beer through the cellar and all the right beers being packed into the right packaging type and going out the door at the right time. So involved in all that kind of stuff.
So you're the guy that glues it all together, right?
I'd like to think so.
Yeah, nice. So what's the point of this evening then? Some of you at home will have the Tryanuary tasting box. And if you did get that and joining in, then that's fantastic. But this is also here for afterwards as well. So we're going to leave this live. If you're watching after the fact, great. And if you're watching this live, then do check out sirencraftbrew.com tomorrow. You can use code TRY20 for 20% off the entire website. That's just been the Tryanuary category until now. Tomorrow it's going to be the entire website. And if you're watching after the fact, then great. Thank you very much. If you don't have the Tryanuary tasting box, don't worry. This is hopefully going to apply to a lot of different beers and should make sense. We're going to go through a lot of different areas of brewing and beer, all themed around these lovely beers. So first thing to touch on really is what is craft beer? Jake, what is craft beer for you?
I think it is... it's just taking a bit of extra time. Well, I don't know. It's probably having the opportunity to make stuff with full flavour. It's not just about finding the economies of scale and trying to do things to make the product you need to make at the fastest and cheapest way. We obviously still care about yields and doing things sensibly in a way in that you can economically make sense, you can still run a business, but actually lots more focus is put on the flavor, how to get the most flavorful beer you can.
Amen. I think that's a nice way of putting it. I've got an analogy here, and I'm actually going to put this on the screen. What is craft beer? Now, the way I always describe this is imagine a McDonald's burger, which you got on the left, and a burger from like an independent burger producer, which is the one on the right from Burger Bear. Essentially, those two are the same things. You've got a bun, you've got meat, cheese, bacon sometimes, pickle, bit of veg, whatever. Essentially, it's exactly the same thing. The McDonald's one normally looks like that, by the way, but we won't comment on that. The difference here is that one of them is cheap to make. It is widely available. It's fairly cheap to buy. We've all had one. It does the trick. It's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with it. The other one is more care and attention put into the recipe. The ingredients are going to be better ingredients that are brought in. The cooking process is better, but it's probably going to be harder to find, a bit rarer, and it's going to cost a bit more. But overall, that experience of that burger that you pay a bit more for and you get better ingredients and better flavors is going to be worth it. And I think for me, that's the difference between a craft beer and sort of a mass-produced beer, detailed there as mass-produced lager. And of course, that actually brings us nicely onto the first beer in this box, which is Soundwave. Now, I don't know what beer you've just poured out, Jake.
I've actually gone for the Soundwave 0.5.
Okay.
Start low.
Yeah, that's a good place to start, to be fair. So what you need for a beer is obviously glassware. Now, how important is glassware in beer tasting and things like that?
Yeah, I would say if you're doing like sensory analysis in a lab and when we're doing, me and Sean and those guys at work are really trying to analyze whether we can see any off flavors and make decisions on beers going forward and that kind of stuff, then glassware is super important for that kind of stuff. Depending on the shape of the glass is going to have an impact on how it's going to capture aroma and those kind of things. If you're sitting tasting at home and you want to take it really seriously, then yeah, absolutely, then go for that same kind of thing. But generally, I'd say that it's your favorite glass, the one that you like drinking with, is the one that you're probably going to enjoy the beer most with. I mean, there are definitely ones with, for example, if you're drinking a Broken Dream and you want to see that really good cascade with the nitro pour, you want a sort of a tall, slimmer pint glass where you're going to get to see that cascade through.
Yeah, the nitro glass works perfectly for that.
Yeah, exactly.
It's always something that when I do live tastings online, I always give a bit of a demonstration of the best way to drink beer. And the question I was pitched to someone is, what is the best way to drink beer? And ultimately, I think the best way to drink beer is just grab a beer, grab a friend, have a chat, and enjoy the beer. But if you want to know a few more details, then I would never fill the glass first off. If you want to get full flavor, hand over the top, bit of a swill around, let those bubbles come out. And then you're going to get way more aroma than you may do before. And then just a couple of little sips, essentially, just to get those flavors a bit. And that's delicious. I've gone for the standard Soundwave because my 0.5 is just out there beyond reach. I've left over there. So can food and things like that affect the flavor of beers?
Yeah, definitely. If you're pairing or drinking beer with food can really change how it comes across. If you're eating something spicy, then potentially a hoppy beer the hops will be more pronounced, and it might even make the spiciness in the food come out more. It kind of doesn't really feel right. You'd normally associate, if you're going to go and have a curry, you'd have it with a lager, which is great. But actually, if you pair a curry with something like, if you did go for like a stout or something like that, it can be really interesting how they can compare and contrast against each other
and play with each other. Blue cheese and stout is one of my favorite ever food pairings. I think it's absolutely fantastic. All right, so we've mentioned hops there. Later down the line, we're going to get into hops and malts and yeast and water and adjuncts and all these different things that can create different flavors in beers. But as you've got the Soundwave 0.5 and as I've left mine out there and I won't get to enjoy one, let's talk about 0.5 and low alc brewing, because there's a real burst in popularity for this at the moment. So how do brewers go about brewing this low alcohol beer?
Yeah, so there's a few ways you can do it. You can buy some equipment which costs you a lot of money,
Right.
which is a sort of like de-alkalizing equipment. So that's where you're basically going to brew a normal beer and then you're going to take the alcohol out, and that's
Yeah.
through filtration or reverse osmosis, those kind of style things, and that's actually filtering the beer to take the alcohol out.
Okay.
The other ways you can do it are by a sort of a limited fermentation.
Mhm.
Um, and so that is, I mean, it's a real challenge for us. We only did our first alcohol-free beer, I think, last January, about a year ago,
Yeah.
working with the guys at
Mash
Mash
Gang.
Gang.
Yeah.
And you really have to sort of think about the way, Jordan at Mash Gang, really, really interesting guy. Obviously, they've got lots of experience, and he kind of said you've got to just imagine you're trying to like forget about all the rules you know about brewing, forget about all the technical stuff, like forget about what makes a good beer. Try and
Mm.
work out if you wanted to create something which didn't ferment very much, so didn't produce too much alcohol. How would you do that? And forget that you can't do things. Just how would you do that? And then start going down that route. And
Right.
it's a really interesting challenge. I know that Sean before wasn't particularly interested in
Yeah.
low alcohol beer, but it's something that I feel like he is getting, well, he's really got into. I feel like we have as many conversations about that as about anything else at the minute, which is really fun, because it is such a challenge for a brewer to be able to create something that's good when you've got to change so many of the things that you're used to doing.
Yeah, because like, how much does ABV affect overall flavour of a beer? Because I was having a conversation with some lads in our flagship bar in RG1 earlier, and I gave them a pint of Mesmerist each, and they were saying, "Golly, 3.4. There's so much flavour in this." But
Mm.
then we've got a new dipper out, Smart Shuffle, and there's loads of flavour in that. Obviously, it's that 8%, that's stronger. So what is it ABV that's really affecting those flavors? Like, does it matter that much?
Yeah, it does really help. It adds body and mouthfeel and
Right.
some sweetness and those kind of things. And so yeah, the alcohol being in the beer, definitely the sort of characteristics and the things you're used to in how a beer tastes and feels,
Mm.
ABV and alcohol has a big impact on that. And the other thing is that alcohol, so ethanol is a good solvent, and so it actually carries and brings through lots of the flavor. So if you dry hop, or if you put hops into a beer which has got alcohol in it, the
Yeah,
ethanol is going to help with the extraction of the flavor and things from those hops, and you're just not going to get that, or you're not going to get it in the same way with the alcohol not there.
I see.
And so yeah, there's lots of things which contribute to how a low alcohol beer tastes compared to a standard beer.
Mm.
But yeah, the alcohol does have a really big impact on that. And so the challenge for trying to make a low alc beer that's full of flavor is how you kind of put the things back in that are going to be missing, or going to be lowered due to not having the alcohol there, and having that limited fermentation. I know we said we'd talk about yeast later, but like the fermentation process and what yeast does, which essentially it's converting a sugar into alcohol and CO2. And during that process, it goes through all sorts of different pathways, and sometimes it gets stuck, and sometimes it produces different metabolites during that fermentation process. And if you're just naturally, with the way that we make low alcohol beer, is a much more limited fermentation, and so
Right.
you're limiting all of those things. So you're going to limit the esters you produce, and the aldehydes and the glycerol, and all of those things which again you're used to, and all of those compounds make up how a normal standard beer would taste, and you just don't have as many of those. So you've got to find ways to put that flavor back into the beer.
Okay. And that would be with hops, I guess.
Yeah. So hop oils and water treatment, and a number of different ways.
Oh,
Adding body through water treatment is a really good one for that.
nice. Well, I haven't got one in front of me, but I know what Soundwave 0.5 tastes like because I've had an awful lot of it recently. And it's there's definitely a bigger sweetness from Soundwave as I'm having this now. And then what you're saying there makes perfect sense with the yeast and the sugars, etc. So, but I do think there's a really nice representation of the hops and Soundwave in that 0.5 version. So when you're creating a recipe as a brewer, do you have sort of target ABVs to make a flavor profile in mind?
Yeah, definitely. It's your beer style. Again, one of the fun things about craft beer is you don't have to be a slave to sort of style guidelines and those kind of things. But generally, we do kind of know if you're going to be selling an IPA to someone, they're probably going to be expecting it to be 5%, 6% plus sort of area. And if it's a double IPA, it's going to be 8%. If it's an imperial stout, it's going to be more than that. And so and because ABV has an impact, you're gonna start have a starting point. Basically, when you start your recipe, one of the first things you're going to do is decide what your finishing extract is going to be. So how much sugar is going to be left in the beer after it's finished fermenting. And so if you're starting there, you kind of then know if you want it to be a certain percent ABV, you need to then know what sugar or what your extract is going to have to be when you start the fermentation process.
Sure. Okay. Well, that's really interesting. I've certainly learned a bit more about 0.5% and low ABV brewing there. So let's talk about these bad boys, which we will recognize as hops, but not everyone might recognize these as hops. And not everyone might know what a hop is. So we're going to go through hops a little bit. So before we get into hops, when I do my live tastings online, when I first started doing them, I was sort of saying, right, this beer has Citra and Mosaic and Simcoe. And you see people sort of going, what on earth is that? And you go, oh, sorry, they're the hops. And then they go, what on earth is a hop? So I found it quite nice to be able to explain what hops are. So bear with me if you know what hops are, but that's great. Hops, wild growing plant. They grow wild in the UK. They grow wild pretty much everywhere. It was back in, I think, the 1600s when there was people that went across to America and they took with them the wild growing hops in the UK. And then they crossbred them with the wild growing hops in America. And eventually, American hop production basically found its home in the Cascadia region, the Pacific Northwest. And I think it's something like 99% of all American hops are grown in this one area. And about 69% of those hops are in one valley, specifically the Yakima Valley there. And America is the #1 hop grower in the world. So massive amount of hops just in this one area, just due to the climate there. And we now have different hops like Neo-Mexicanas hops, which are growing in sort of warmer climates with less water, etc., which is great for climate change. However, we don't get hops like this in general. We have done in the past. We've had them flash frozen like this, straight out the fields where they've just picked them, frozen them, and then we've brewed with them. And that was really lovely. But you may see on that picture on the left there's a bit of yellow on this hop. And that is what we called lupulin. And that is the oils and the flavor in the hops. So the green stuff, the leafy product, is essentially just waste product. And what we want to brew with is the yellow stuff, the lupulin. And so hop providers and hop growers now pelletize hops. And this is how we get them. So correct me if I'm wrong here, Jake, but back in the day, the hops on the right you can see there are the kiln-dried hops. Mm-hmm. Now, back in the day with brewing, there's only so much of that you can put in with the boil before it literally just starts overflowing, right? So there's only so much hop flavor you can get. Whereas with modern brewing, with things like liquid hops and cryogenically frozen hops, where they've got a much higher percentage of the lupulin, we can use far more hops and therefore get more aroma and more flavor. And that's why nowadays we have these hazy beers with hops in suspension, etc. Am I about right there?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's the other thing is those hop flowers, they kind of, and you're using whole hop cones, they suck up so much of the beer, and so you're gonna lose way more beer like that. And so for each turn of the brew kit that you do, or each turn of the kettle, you're gonna get less beer out of there. And the same if you're using them. Well, if you're using them dry hop side, again, it's just you just lose a lot more of the beer from that being sucked up. Whereas pellets, T90 pellets, the 90 means you're getting 90% of the sort of green vegetable matter, but you're still getting all of the lupulin, all of the oils that you want. And so yeah, you're just taking off a small amount of that vegetation, means you lose less beer. The other thing that's great as well, as you were saying, we get most of our hops from the US.
Mhm.
We also get them from New Zealand and parts around the world. As soon as you're just transporting a little bit less weight of that hop, it just makes it. I mean, it's still mad at like dragging in the ingredients we do from around the world, but it's gonna use less fuel. It's gonna be less heavy, those kind of things. So
Yeah.
that's all kind of good for that kind of sustainability stuff too.
Yeah, that's a nice angle that I hadn't really ever thought about, to be fair, but that's really good. And then cryogenically frozen hops now, they literally just cryogenically freeze the hops, smash them up, and mechanically separate the green and the yellow, the waste from the flavor, and then repackage them into pellets as best they can. So I think that's about, is that T45, so about 45% lupulin.
Yeah, 45% green matter. Yeah, exactly. You keeping all your lupulin, 45% of the vegetable matter, and that cryo and CGX and all that kind of stuff. Like really bad products. We use cryo and CGX a lot in our hop waters because
Yeah.
it means that you're getting lots and lots of that hop flavor, but you're not putting too much of that green vegetable matter into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to open up Suspended and Laurel here, which is in the box. We're a 4% hazy pale ale, so nice sort of lower ABV, really easy drinking, and a nice hazy beer. One of my favorite beers of all time, the Suspended Rage. If this is new to people, it's a range of beers that we generally only do in keg and cask, and then occasionally we'll can these beers. And so each brew is focusing on a different hop. So this one is laurel hops. Hop growers obviously make different hops and aim for different flavors. So there might be hops with more grassy notes or more pineapple notes or more melon notes. Some of them have a sort of combination. And then, Jake, it's your job as brewers to sort of say, right, I want this beer to have these notes, so I'm going to use this lineup of hops, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
How important is it then on where those hops are used within the brewing process?
Yes, it's super important. So the main sort of two things we get from hops is they have alpha acids in them, which when isomerized, and they get isomerized through heat, they become they're bitter. So that's where you get your bitterness in beer from, is from the isomerized alpha acids in hops. But then they also have those oils, as you're saying, which are volatile, lots of flavor and aroma, but are volatile. So
Yeah.
you can imagine if you put a hop into a situation where it's hot, you'll get bitterness, but you'll lose a lot of that aroma and flavor. Whereas if you put them into a situation where it's cooler, or actually even sort of cold, or we call it dry hopping, where it's not dry, it's wet. It goes into the FE, but at that point you're somewhere between 10 and 20 degrees.
Yeah.
And when it's much cooler, then you're keeping lots of those volatile flavor and aroma oil like compounds, and you're not getting that bitterness come through. And so just deciding which hop you're going to use where is going to make a huge impact on the beer and the beer flavor you get at the end.
So another beer in this box is Expression Citra. And if at home you've got something different, that's great. But this is obviously a double dry hopped IPA. So this is what we're talking about with dry hopping or cold side hopping, it can be called as well. Double dry hopping, that's just literally we are putting in more and more hops, right?
Yeah, more hops, and also we dry hop it twice, so normally a couple of days apart. And so if you, again, it's part of that, depending where you put your hop in, like what part of the process, you get different expressions. It's the name's a good one. But yeah, if you put hops into the dry hop during fermentation, where you've got some active fermentation and the yeast is still present, you can get some biotransformation flavors in there. And then so our first dry hop goes in that kind of phase, and then the second dry hop comes in later. So you're going to get less of that and a slightly different expression from the hop.
Yeah, absolutely.
and you get that more saturation as well as the beer becomes more and more saturated with the hops. You're going to see that haze develop, and also you're going to get more pronounced flavors come through.
And there's a lovely sort of slight different color on these beers as well, which is really nice. But both of these an example of single hopped beers, which is really nice to get that single expression, as you say, of a single hop. Citra, obviously, one of the most, I keep saying obviously, by the way, and I apologize for that. Citra is one of the most famous hops that we would know of, probably one of the most well used. And then we've got Laurel, which is it a New Zealand hop?
I don't know. I think it's a US one, but I don't know for that sure, but I think it's US.
It might be US. I think you are right there. But really different characters you're getting from them, and that's really nice. Talking through some of the sort of touch points of brewing here on this graphic. Number one, what is that big piece of equipment there in number one?
Yeah, so number one's our mash tun, and so mashing. So essentially, to make a beer, go to proper basics. To make a beer, you want to get some grain, which is predominantly barley malt, and you want to get the. I don't know if you can you hear my dog in the background?
That's fine. We're a dog-friendly brewery.
Arnie's wanting to get involved. Yeah, and so you want to. So in the mash tun, what you're doing is you're getting grain which has got starch and sugars in it, and you're mixing it with water at a certain temperature and pH. And depending on that temperature and pH, you have different enzymes at work that convert those starches into fermentable sugars. So you end up what comes out of the mash tun is a sugary liquid which we call wort, and that is going to be the starting point for having that bank of sugar that we're going to be able to convert and ferment into alcohols.
And then number two, this is where we would add hops in the hot side. So this is the kettle where we're literally just boiling the beer, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we boil it, and you boil it for a whole host of reasons. It drops your pH, it clarifies it sterilizes it. It does all sorts of things. But yeah, and this is where you're going to put your hot side hops in, which is you're gonna predominantly, if you put it in at the start, where it's then going to be we boil most things for an hour, for 60 minutes. If you put it in at the start, you're going to get lots of that isomerization, and so your hops are going to be turned into isoalpha acids, and you're going to get that bitterness come through. Again, talking about like different hops and that kind of stuff, like it's really interesting. Even though I've kind of said that if you're putting in the start of the boil, you're just going to get bitterness out. Depending on what hop you're using, you're going to get slightly different types of bitterness. We know that like Simcoe, if we use Simcoe, we get a really nice clean bitterness come through from that. Right. If we're using sort of lots of low alpha acid German hops, we get a nice sort of structured, sort of smoother bitterness that we're trying to get and see in our lagers. And so the type of hop will also make a difference there in the how the bitterness is perceived too.
And number three, it's not a great picture of it, but this is the whirlpool. So here we're literally just whirling the beer around to get rid of any sort of leftover hop matter. Is that right?
Yeah. So you get, as I was saying, in the boil, in the kettle, you get it clarifies the wort, it pulls out some of the proteins, and also you've got that hop matter that's in there. And so you put it into the whirlpool. It allows that. It's called trub. It allows the trub to sort of form as a cone in the middle of the whirlpool, and then you can knock out or take off the clear wort from a side port to mean that you can leave that solid stuff behind that we don't want anymore, and take off the nice clear wort into the fermenter.
Yeah. So as you've just mentioned, fermenters, number 4, FV would have been said a few times. When I first joined Siren 6 years ago, people kept saying FV. And I thought it was Effie. So I thought Effie was like some sort of nickname for something. FV is just literally the fermentation vessel. As I learned and wrote a blog about, I took that one on the chin. So in the fermentation vessel, this is where the beer is literally fermenting. That's where we add the yeast, and that's where we would dry hop. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. So that we control the temperature in there, and so that you pitch your yeast in. The fermentation process is then going to be monitored over the course of somewhere between sort of 2 to 3 weeks, and yeah, we're controlling the temperature. We're watching each day. We're measuring the pH and the density of that. We're seeing the fermentation process go through. We're also doing sensory tests on it at that point and checking that it's doing its thing. It's maturing in the way we want it to do. And yeah, and this is where we're going to add our dry hop. So when it gets to the part of the process where we know we want to do that, we can then literally pouring the hops into the top of the vessel. Actually, the photo you've got is of the quad tanks outside. We don't pour the hops into the top of the vessel in there. We have a hop cannon for doing that.
Just in case there's anyone from the health and safety brigade watching. Hop cannon, by the way, is literally the beer comes into the hop cannon, and then we can hop the hop cannon, and then that goes back into the tank and circulates around, right? So number 5 is our canning line, which is the end of the process. No more hopping. The only thing we might add there is nitrogen, which we can talk about in a moment as well. But there we go. That's a little bit about the brewing process. So we touched on hop water, and I think it's a nice way to end our little chat on hops with a hop water. So you might have Crush at home. I have a Nelson Sauvin here. In the past, we've made Citra and Idaho 7. So this is literally just sparkling carbonated water with hops added to it.
Yeah, that is it.
It surprises everyone that, and there's, how many calories? No calories. Or how much alcohol? No alcohol. Is it gluten-free? Yes, it is. It's water. But that is, for me, if you want to understand what a hop tastes like, hop water is the most pure expression of a hop.
Yeah, and it's been a really, really interesting project. I know that Sean, head brewer, and Darren, founder of Siren, they went out to the US for hop selection during the hop harvest a couple of years ago. Yeah. And hop water was everywhere over there. And yeah, when they were drinking it, they could really see how that would be a really nice product to come into our lineup.
Yeah.
And I must admit, when I first heard about it, I tried one. I can't remember who it was by. It was quite a long time ago. It's when I was working at Wild Beer, and I'm just thinking, I just don't understand. Like, this isn't a beer. For me, it was like, oh, this isn't a low alcohol beer. It isn't a beer alternative. What is it for? And actually, as soon as you start making it, as soon as you start drinking it, and like the guys in the brewery, it's their kind of like go-to thing during the day is for refreshment and those kind of things. It's really, really cool. And yeah, it can be if you've gone down to the tap yard and you're the driver and you're not going to be drinking, then hop water's great. You still get some of those beer cues, or lots of beer cues from the hops.
Yeah.
But it's also, I like it. So I think it's a really interesting alternative to having sort of a lemonade or a Coke or those kind of things where it hasn't got that sweetness. I just think it's a really, really cool product.
It's a very cool product. It's completely unlike anything else. It's very unique, but it's very refreshing. I'm a bit of an obsessed, a sparkling hop water obsessive. But it's really interesting for me because comparing, say, the Citra hop water to something like Citra Expression Citra, the beer, there's so much. There's a real different flavor profile there. Even though we talk about hops as being one of the most important parts of beer. And when people choose beers, they choose them because of the hops. And I've always thought there's so much more to it than that. This is the cleanest expression of a hop you're going to get. But I've talked to Sean about this before, and we made a video on this where I was suggesting that people need to start looking at other things when choosing beers, not just hops, because it all comes together. It's a recipe. And I think that brings us on to talking about malts quite well, because I think malts play a huge part in brewing. So the beer that from this box that I'd like to introduce at that time is Sparkle. And that's because it has a very minimal malt bill, right? Sparkle is pretty clean on the malt bill. What do I mean when I say clean?
Yeah, so it's got our base malt in. I'm trying to remember exactly. Actually, I've got my recipe up. I think it's got a small amount of like Caramunic or something in there, but yeah, pretty much it is just our base malt in there. So that's barley malt, low color barley malt, and and so that's what's providing in the mash tun. That's the thing that we're mashing, which is then providing the sugars for the wort. So yeah, you get a nice. It's really, it allows it to have a really nice, clean sort of backbone for the beer to then let the hop shine on top of it.
Yeah, I'm gonna just show this here. People won't have this at home, but I have a can of Mesmerist here that I picked up earlier, and the reason I've got a Mesmerist is because they have exactly the same hops, Mesmerist and Sparkle. So that's Mesmerist, and that's Sparkle. So you can see the difference in those beers just purely from the malts and the malt bill. And I'm going to do a little flavor test as well. How, like, when you're developing a beer, etc., how important does that sort of malt lineup play, or is it, or do you have an idea of, we're brewing an IPA, so it's going to be these malts. We're brewing this, so it's going to be these malts. Or do you sit down and you really think about what flavors they're bringing in?
Yeah, you definitely think about what flavor. It's flavor, and it's all sorts of other things as well. So haze, as you've seen, is kind of part of that, and mostly what that's going to play a part in is mouthfeel. And so you're gonna, I'd imagine that sparkle is going to be a bit almost a bit peppier, a bit drier, whereas Mesmerist has got that soft sort of rounded mouthfeel to it. And again, even though you've got the same hops in there, because you've got those slightly different flavors and slightly different mouthfeels, that all the perceived flavor of the hops is going to come across slightly different too. That's
really interesting, trying those both side by side, by the way. If anyone's got these two beers, then I recommend that, because they do have a very similar flavor profile from the hops, but there's a real noted difference in the sort of finish of those. So again, let's back up when we're talking about hops. Malts. The malting process begins in a field. These photos are from when I went up to Norwich to visit Simpson's Malt. We literally stood in the field with the farmer who grows the malts that end up coming to our brewery. Great fun, really interesting to hear about the whole process. So it's quite a complicated process. So harvested barley is sorted and cleaned. It's then steeped in water. Essentially, it's just soaked in water for 36 to 48 hours. And that's what you can see in the sort of top middle there. They keep moving it around, and that motion of the malt sort of flying out the top is a very loud, very noisy process, but it's really interesting. And what that is doing is raising the moisture level in the grains. When after that, the malts are germinated. The aim of germination is to grow the barley grains and allows the development of malt enzymes. Then they're kilned, and the bottom middle there is those massive kilns, and very lovely sweet smell that come from that. And we tasted some of the malts sort of fresh out of the kiln, and it's really delicious. So different temperatures and different timings are going to do different things to that same grain. So obviously a longer or a heavier roast, you're going to get dark malts, like in the previous picture here at the top. And those dark malts are going to generally be used for a stout, give chocolate and coffee and roasted notes, toffee notes. Medium roast malts are going to get sort of honey and toffee notes. And then light malts that you might see in something like Sparkle or a lager get more of those bready, nutty and sweet notes, etc. But there are just a bunch of different malts, different grains, different reasons, different profiles. And it's your job to sort of bring those all together, right?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Which brings me on to Origin Story, which was a beer designed by our head brewer, Sean. Tell me, Jake, I believe Origin Story this year has, is it 30 malts?
Yeah, over 30 malts, yeah.
Over 30 different malts. So how does Sean go about, working out which malts he's going to have in this beer?
I've got a theory about this, and I think that I think Sean enjoys brewing Origin Story just after we've done Caribbean Chocolate Cake series, so that he can then all of his little leftovers that he's got from brewing that series, he can then throw into one big beer.
Right.
And it's a nice way of him using up his stock ready for the new year. But like, joking aside, it's amazing how many different layers of flavor you can get in by just using slightly different malts, and from your black malt and your roasted barley, which is going to add your sort of like real roasty sort of burnt coffee, all the way through to stuff like there's chocolate rye, which can come across as like a really like nice sweet milk chocolate. We use some red rye crystal in there, which is the rye is going to add a sort of slightly sort of spicy slightly spicy note to it, but I guess kind of the same sort of spice as you can get from like cinder toffee, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And with a stout, even with a beer this dark, it's still going to be majority pale malt. That's still your base, and that's the thing that's really driving and giving you most of your fermentable sugar. What we're doing with the specialty malt is actually adding in, it's just 1 or 2% here and 1 or 2% there, and that's what's then adding in those different flavors. And Origin Stories, like the complexity for like a beer like that is awesome. Yeah, it hasn't got adjuncts in, or it doesn't have any of those kind of like flavorings in. We don't use cacao nibs. We haven't got any of that kind of stuff. It's actually all of that depth of flavor is coming through the big malt bill.
And also, before I ask this next question, I'm going to pour this beer, because you've got standard Origin Story. This year we played a little bit of a thing. We did Origin S'more, but we also did Nitro version, and I absolutely love Nitro beers. So I've picked up the Nitro one, which I'm going to hard pour now. If you have a Nitro beer at home, then this is how you want to pour it to get this beautiful cascade. Oh man, just look at that. That's just a thing of beauty, isn't it?
And the thing that's cool about this as well is if you get, like, when you get a really, really good Nitro beer like this, the guys on the canning line, like, they are inevitably, to get a good cascade, you have to get the right mixture and balance between your carbonation in the beer and the nitro addition that you're adding during canning, and you have to get that bit right. And we don't always provide them this, like it's not always exactly the same carbonation each time they get it, and so they have to tweak it. And so I'll go into the canning line on a day like that into the canning room, and they'll be testing and tweaking and pouring them out, and they just get to the point where they get a perfect cascade, and then we know that's it, and they can run from there. So yeah, it's the expertise and the experience of the guys in the canning room that make sure we get a really nice pour like that.
Yeah, and it is that's just a beautiful thing. It's not for everyone, Nitro, because it does create this big thicker head, which might lock in some of those aromas. But for me, that thick, glorious, sort of oily thing you get with a Nitro beer, maybe it reminds me of that sort of early days of drinking a Guinness. I don't know, but I'm a big fan of it. Another thing with a big beer like this is temperature. So what role does temperature play with a beer like this?
Yeah, so as your beer warms up, so again, you kind of view it a bit of the change between cask beer and keg beer that you'd get in the pub. And so cask beer on your hand pulls is at a sort of 10 degrees sort of serving temperature, whereas your keg beer is going to be more like sort of 4 degrees.
Yeah.
And the difference between the two is, you can imagine, like, if it's a hot day and you want something super, super refreshing and easy drinking, you go for that sort of colder beer that doesn't have necessarily as much flavor in it, and it's slightly easier just to smash back, and that means you're going to have, it's going to be colder and more refreshing. If it's warmer, you're going to be releasing a few more of those volatiles and those aromatics, so you're going to get more of the aroma coming off the beer, and that's inevitably going to be more flavor too. And so with a stout like this and this kind of beer, drinking it slightly warmer, not absolutely fridge cold, you're going to get more out of it.
Excellent. It's such a great beer, and there's again just so many flavors in there. And I remember speaking to Sean about this. Every time you go in, you're going to find something new. So you might take a sip of that and go, "Oh, quite like that." You get chocolate from it, and then a couple of minutes later, you go, "Oh, hang on, no, it tastes of toffee. Oh no, hang on, it tastes of caramel or whatever it is." There's loads going on.
Yeah.
So another question for you. In Finchampstead, we've got very, very hard water. And it's been great for our stouts over the years. Like Broken Dream has always been incredible with the water. How important a role does water play in brewing, and how do we treat our water in the brewery?
Yeah, so water's massive. It's one of your four ingredients. It's one that's forgotten often, and it plays a huge role. And
Yeah,
you can make any beer style with any water, but if you want to make the best dark beers, you're going to need water that's got lots of minerals in it. And if you're going to
yeah,
want to make the best like light pale like your classic kind of pilsners and that kind of stuff, you're going to want water that hasn't got much in it, a very soft water.
yeah.
Um, and so yeah, what we have is we've got a water treatment. That means it just strips out and softens our water, just takes some of those minerals out and allows us a better or a easier base water to start with that we can then add minerals back into to build up the water profiles that we want for the beers that we're going to make.
Excellent.
And like a kind of like a basic introduction into that kind of water profiles. If you've got you can look at the balance between sulfates and chlorides.
Yeah,
And so sulfates, a higher proportion of sulfates in your water is going to help accentuate your hop profile. It's going to make hops come across maybe slightly more bitter and a bit if that kind of slightly drier. Whereas if you've got more chlorides in, that can add sweetness and body and mouthfeel for that kind of stuff. So yeah, exactly. If that's the Mesmerist and the Sparkle again, we definitely
right.
we change our water profile for those two beers. We'll go more sulfate heavy for the Sparkle, and we'll go more chloride heavy for Mesmerist.
Yeah. So if you're having a West Coast beer, or one of our like Cali IPAs, things like that, that's going to be a more sulfate heavy beer to get that crispness. And softer beers like Lumina, Soundwave, Expressions, Double, anything New England style, that's going to be the chloride heavy for that soft mouthfeel.
Yeah, and slight sweetness to it. It sounds weird. So table salt is sodium chloride. You don't necessarily you'd think of that as being sweet, but if you have a glass of water and you add a little bit of salt to it, it will come across as being slightly more slightly bigger mouthfeel and slightly sweet. Obviously as you add more and more and more, that will become more and more exaggerated until it turns salty. But if you just add a small amount of that in there, then it just comes across as bigger and sweeter.
Yeah, my brother drinks a lot of sparkling water, and he'll add table salt to his sparkling water just to enhance the flavour of it. So in the right doses, it really works, to be fair. So talking about malts, that brings me on to Lumina, which is a beer we launched in 2020 and mid-pandemic. Probably not the best time to launch a new flagship beer, but we saw a gap in the market, or gap in our range, between Yulu at the time at 3.8 and Soundwave at 5.6. We had nothing in that sweet spot for 4.2 in the middle. So enter Lumina Session IPA. We launched it in this glass. Anyone paying attention will notice I've had a different siren glass for every beer so far. The Lumina at the time was, I believe, our first gluten-free beer. And it has wheat and oats in that malt bill, and it has that sort of softer mouthfeel. How are we getting a beer like this gluten-free, and what does that mean, Jake? Because there's a real rise of gluten-free beers at the moment, and I think that's great. But we think of gluten-free bread as fairly inferior to normal bread, rightly or wrongly. Rightly, by the way. But the beers are great. Like gluten-free beers, it doesn't affect it. So what's the process here, and why aren't more beers gluten-free?
It's a great question. I think beer absolutely had that same stigma before, in that if it's gluten-free, then you've doctored it in some way, or you've taken something out of it. It's not going to be as good.
Yeah.
So yeah, gluten free means that the level of gluten is below a certain below a certain threshold, which
20
means that
parts
it
per
then
million.
yeah, exactly. And the way that we do our gluten free is by most people out there is by putting in an enzyme, and so that enzyme just breaks down that gluten into a smaller, less complex carbohydrate, and so it then doesn't have that same impact.
Yeah.
Um, and it's why aren't people doing it? It does have a slight it costs more if you're this enzyme has a cost to it,
Yeah.
and so inevitably it's going to cost slightly more, and you have to go through like you're going to have to go through a process of sending it off to a lab if you haven't got a lab in house to be able to test it and make sure it is
Okay.
gluten free. So there's going to be costs associated with that, but
Yeah.
like loads of people use it. Quite a lot of people, when I was out in Norway, they were putting this enzyme into every single one of their beers, because they were just finding that it helped them with the stabilization of the product. So it helped with haze for their beers that they wanted to be bright, and it helped them not create haze during their shelf life of the beer.
Oh, I see.
um,
Yeah. Okay.
and so yeah, there's no, if there is an impact on the flavor, it's not a negative one. Lumina tastes great. It has that stable
Mm.
haze to it. It's a yeah. Lumina's obviously a fantastic beer, our bestseller,
Yeah.
and it's gluten free. So yeah, I don't know. I think more people should be making it. Well, actually, more people shouldn't make it because it's a really good selling point for us. I know that there are people that go and drink down my local down the Fox and Hounds and drink there regularly, and because there's Lumina on, they need a gluten free beer, and it
Amen.
tastes great.
Interestingly, when we first started doing Lumina, we created 2 different keg badges, one that said gluten free and one that didn't. It's always been gluten free, but we left it to venues to decide whether they think they would sell more to their customers with it being listed or not. And I believe now we've stopped producing the ones that don't say gluten free. We're just running with it because it is great and it doesn't affect it. And I think people know what Lumina is now and know what gluten free beers are. So that's really good to hear. So origin story, full of flavors from the malts. Lumina is full of flavors from the hops and other things that are going into that, the wheat and the oats, etc. as well. So malts playing a role, but sometimes we literally just add some other ingredients in. Famous examples would be our barista series, where we add coffee, and of course Caribbean chocolate cake, where we add chocolate and other things as well. So let's talk about adjuncts. And in that box, we've got cherry in your tree. So we'll talk about that if you want to open that. I don't have cherry in your tree with me, but I do have Pompelmoncello, which people will know. Pompelmoncello is a grapefruit sour IPA, which has grapefruit zests and grapefruit juice, but we also have grapefruit heavy hops, so it's a really grapefruity thing. How do we go about using adjuncts then, and when do we decide that we want to add adjuncts to a beer?
Yeah, so the traditional definition of an adjunct is anything that provides fermentable sugar that isn't malted barley, and it's now commonly used for basically anything you put into a beer, that isn't in the normal sort of like malt, hops,
Yeah,
yeast, water sort of category of ingredients. Um, so like hops being used as the main thing to give flavor in beer as like in addition to malt is actually a relatively modern thing. Back in the day, we used to make beer and you'd flavor it with all sorts of things. You'd use spices, use herbs, you'd use hops as just kind of one of those things.
yeah,
It became something that we used as the majority, and so putting fruit into beer and putting these flavors into beer is actually is a really old traditional thing to do.
right.
For us, I think that if we're so cherry in your tree, for example, we've put in different berries and fruits, actual like fruit concentrate and fruit puree into that beer, because it just exaggerates exaggerates those flavors we're looking for. I know that Sean, I'm trying to remember. I think actually he told me, but there's a Friedrichsthal is a cherry wine. I think McKellar, when they first, they started doing some of these sort of like strong cherry beers back in the day, and sort of inspired by these guys. And I think Sean's had a few of these Friedrichsthal cherry wines, and that combination of the sort of higher alcohol and the cherry and that fruit in there and the sweetness is a really, really nice combination of flavors.
Absolutely.
And so we put and we put mad amounts of fruit into beer as well. There's points where we're putting a ton of fruit puree into a beer to sort of bring out different flavors, but also it's super fresh. With Pomp, we've got a really good supplier of pink grapefruit juice and zest that we put into the beer, and the sort of sourness, and there's that tart, fresh sour notes you get from Pomp, and then it really, really complemented with using the actual fruit products too.
I haven't had Pompomoncello for a while, and I've just forgotten how great this beer is. And there's a reason why a 6% like grapefruit sour IPA has been around for so long, because man, that is absolutely glorious. I love it. The big photo in the middle there is mango puree going into Send Me More Sunshine. The music fans, little factoid of you, will probably not recognize those arms as the arms of the lead singer of Millencolin, who was in to brew with us for the Duck Pond collab. And the next day we were just like, right, we've got to add a ton of puree in, so you can get in there and help us out, son. The day after that, he was playing Slam Dunk Festival, so good on him for helping out. So let's talk a few ways we use adjuncts. So purees, it's literally just when the beer is fermenting, we're pouring those purees in.
Exactly that.
Zests, they are going in during the boil, is that right?
We use zest in a few different places. We use it in the boil, in the whirlpool, and in FE, in the fermenter. And again, you get kind of slightly different things as in the different parts of the process. And we've actually put zest into the Spinbot yesterday as part of another beer that's going to be coming out next month. I won't say what it is in case that's part of your secret and reveal and that kind of thing. But some really, really nice fresh lime and grapefruit zest into the Spinbot. That can kind of go in at a few different stages.
Nice. So Spinbot's going to be an interesting word for some people who don't know what we're talking about there. So let me explain that just briefly, because previously, you can see on the right-hand side here, there's these wood cubes going into a bag. And wood is another thing we use a lot of. The idea of not aging beer in wood, which we also do a lot of, but using wood and the flavors of wood in a beer. Most notably, of course, in our Caribbean chocolate cake series. And you get that lovely sort of vanilla note. And you also get like Amburana wood, Brazilian wood, has that spicy sort of cinnamon note. But you also get these drying tannins, etc. I believe, actually, the photos I was taking of those cubes were tequila-soaked cubes for the tequila bib, Cafe Patron. Viva Patron or whatever it's called, I can't remember. But what happens if you put something, let's say a big bag of coffee or chocolate, into the top of a fermentation vessel, then the time it takes to get that flavor into the beer is going to increase. Much like if you put a cold tea bag into a tea bag into some cold water, that's going to take a while to turn that into a cup of tea. You might actually do that overnight. On a brewing scale, you don't want to do that, because you mentioned earlier, beers are in a fermentation vessel for 2 to 3 weeks. And one of my favorite little words here, lager as a process, is a favorite term of the wonderful Melissa Cole. And it literally is the process of lagering a beer. And if you leave something to gain flavor in a fermentation vessel, to get the flavors you want might take, 4, 5, 6 weeks, in which case you're just lagering that beer down. And you as a brewer probably don't want to do that. You want a bit more control. And that's where we use the Spinbot. So the Spinbot comes from our first ever collab brew with Cigar City. Wayne Wambles came up with this piece of equipment, and then we said, can we build one? And we did. What this is a piece of equipment that we fill with ingredients. We then take the beer from the fermentation vessel, pump it into the top, and it spins around, hits all these ingredients, and then goes back to the fermentation vessel and keeps mixing. And we do that for 48, 72 hours. And that way, all of those ingredients are hitting all of that beer just all of the time, and it's constantly working. And we can get the flavor of that wood or chocolate or coffee or whatever it might be just so much quicker than we would do if we were, just hanging it in bags. Incredible piece of equipment, Jake. What does it mean for like a brewer like you to be able to use something like this when you're sort of creating beers or playing with beers, etc.?
Yeah, it's amazing. The place I've worked previously, the all of the different techniques and things that we tried in order to one is extract flavor, but then also have the control over that extraction. We did all sorts of different things, which inevitably took a long time and created a load of mess and had different tanks being out. And I mean, quite often we got the results we wanted, but it was really, really difficult. And inevitably we had other times where we didn't get the results we wanted. And I remember the first day of my interview and walking, getting a little tour of the brewery, and Sean showing me the Spinbot, and it was like, oh, that is so annoying and amazing. Like that is the exact bit of kit that I've wanted and needed for lots of the projects that I've done previously. So yeah, for me, the thing that's awesome about the Spinbot is the control element of it.
Yeah,
you can extract really, really good flavor from the ingredients. You've got the ingredients separate to your fermentation vessel, and so that separation is lots of help when it comes to cleaning and all of those different things further down the line. But it means that you have like total control over the extraction and how much flavor you're going to get.
absolutely.
And so yeah, when we start spinning something, we'll probably have an idea. If we think it'll probably be about 2 or 3 days or 3 or 4 days, we have an idea of what we think it's going to be. But we'll then taste each day, and we taste the Spinbot. Sometimes we can taste it multiple times during the day, and you get to the point where you can see how the beer is developing and changing as it's spinning on these ingredients, and you can get to the point where you're happy with where it's at, and then stop it. You want to make sure you get the flavor that you want, but you don't want to over extract either. You don't want to get to the point where it then becomes saturated and then potentially turns into something that you don't want it to be. And again, if you've chucked your ingredients in the top of the fermenter, hops are good because you can open the dump or the bottom of the fermenter and you can take the hops out when you want to. You're not necessarily going to be able to do that with cacao nibs or coffee or wood or any of those kind of things that you've thrown in. So yeah, we have control over the flavor we want to get, and the level of extraction you can get from ingredients is next level with the Spinbot. It's a really, really, really cool piece of kit.
Absolutely. It's funny you mentioned hops actually, and I've just gone back to this picture of the flash frozen hops that came like literally straight flash frozen from the field. I don't know if this was before your time. I think it was, but this was something that we got from Yakima Chief, and we brewed a suspended beer with them. I can't for the life of me remember what the hops were. Probably says it on there. Does it? Azaka. Suspended in Azaka we did. And the challenge for Sean and the team was, how can we use these beautiful, like fresh, flash frozen hops, but get the most out of them, bearing in mind there's going to be an awful lot of sort of waste material there, like you said. So we used a Spinbot. We just filled the Spinbot with hops, and then it came through. And I've got a lovely photo of Sean just like with a ladle, just like spooning hops around on the top of that Spinbot. Again, I think that was mid-pandemic because he's wearing a face mask and stuff, so it's very strange. But it was a beautiful beer, and we managed to get a lot of flavour out of that process just using the Spinbot. So, do you have an ingredient that we've not yet used that you would love to brew with? And that's going to be a tough one because Siren have used a lot of ingredients.
Yeah,
maybe you have.
an ingredient I've used at a previous brewery, and I don't know if Siren have used it before, but we used preserved lemons in a beer at Wild Beer called Sleeping Lemons. It was a Gosa, and that
Yeah.
the preserved lemon, again, I really like that contrast of flavors. You've got the sort of sweet sourness from the lemon, and then you've got the saltiness from that preserving process, and that brought out something which was really exciting in that ingredient that then also added loads and loads of stuff to the beer. And again, there's one of the things I really love about beer is that you can have, actually, it's what I was going to say about the hop water previously. When you open a bag of hops, that first sort of smell you get from a bag of hops is quite a lot like the flavor you get from hop water,
100%.
which you can see how that translates into the beer,
Yeah.
but isn't necessarily exactly the same. And so, yeah, with beer, like the malts can smell really good and taste really good if you taste them individually. The hops can smell really good.
Yeah.
But actually, when it all comes together and you have the sort of magical fermentation process, the sum of its parts can be different and again just much greater than what you see individually. And the
Yeah.
preserved lemons I absolutely love for that is that they're a really interesting ingredient, but actually when you then put it into a beer, it then pulled out all sorts of interesting things out of the other ingredients you have in beer that I hadn't necessarily seen before. So yeah, that'd be something I'd be super interested in, especially like we did the preserving process ourselves, and so you kind of know what where that ingredient's been sat for 2 years doing its thing, getting funky, and then yeah, it was really cool putting that in. So yeah, maybe that's something we should put in.
I'm gonna second that vote. I'm gonna send that up the chain as well. That I want you to be involved in that, because I remember Sleeping Lemons. That's prime wild beer for me, when wild beer was really great, making some really exciting beers. There was a mushroom beer that I remember, Sleeping Limes. I bought a bunch of as well. That was really nice. It doesn't surprise me to hear that it was you doing that, Jake. So that's really nice to hear. Siren once made a beer with mealworms, by the way, as an adjunct.
Oh really?
If you know. Nothing's off the table.
Another one I remember tasting, which was awesome, was Yonder made a beer where I think they entirely used birch sap instead of water.
Wow.
Which like it took an army of people a long time to harvest the sap, and they could only make a small run of it. But that was really interesting. And again, completely no water, and using something else as one of your 4 key, and again, water's your 96% of your beer sort of thing. You've taken out your majority ingredient for that. That was really interesting.
Wow, that sounds amazing. It's incredible the stuff that you can do. Like we've at Siren, we've made beer gruits before without hops. We made a gin and tonic inspired beer without hops, and what was the beer called? Andy named it. It was an absolutely wonderful name, but it used lots of herbs. It was with Matt Orlando, who used to be head brewer at Noma. So we used lots of like wild foraged herbs. Marginal Grains, great name for a beer. And it was all like herby and wonderful. It was fantastic. But the things that you can add to a beer to get flavor is just endless. And it's a great thing to play with. So actually talking about Matt Orlando and collaboration, that brings me on to one of the beers in the box, Still Spinning, which is a collaboration with Indie Rabble. So a couple more points to talk about here. Collaboration, and then we'll talk about the sour beers before we wrap up. What does collaboration bring to the table when you're brewing? Like, why do we collaborate?
It kind of like brings us back round to the craft beer thing again. I think one of the really strong tenets of craft beer is that it feels like it's a really genuine collaborative industry, and so there's lots of innovation and creativity going on, and generally most of the time people are then happy to share what they're doing and the ideas and things that they've come up with. And so collaboration is awesome, because you get to spend a number of weeks before the brew day speaking to other brewers and coming up with a recipe together and techniques. And sometimes it can be stuff that you've listened to some podcast and there's stuff you're interested in, and so then you talk that through, and it's a new technique that you want to try. Other times it will be, you know, that you've tried one of their beers and it tasted awesome, and you want to understand sort of why that was, and then try and replicate that on your own kit. Other times it's a combination of ingredients. We did a collab with Verdant last year where we co-pitched our house yeast and their house yeast together, and to see what that fermentation would be like when we were using both yeasts. And so yeah, there's all sorts of things you get out of a collab. But I mean, also it's a great opportunity to have do a normally a long hard day, but finishing with a beer.
Pizzas and a few beers.
Yeah, exactly, and just having a chat about beer, and sometimes a 15-minute conversation with other people in the industry can move your knowledge on. Like me and Sean and the team around different things that we want to try and little tweaks we want to make to beers and all these different things. And sometimes it will take us quite a long time to decide on what change we want to do or to come up with a direction we want to go in. And then you speak to someone else who does the same thing as you, but works in a slightly different place in a slightly different piece of kit. And within 15 minutes, your whole sort of perspective can be changed and a new idea can come out of that. So yeah, collaborations are super cool.
Very cool. And with Still Spinning, actually, the sort of the base IPA that we kind of work on nowadays is I believe came from when we did Time Hops Citra Mosaic. The beer that was based on came back to this New England IPA, but it wasn't just about soft fruity notes. It still had that sort of reserved bitterness. So a beer like this is, still has that sort of level of bitterness. So that's, again, something that we've learned from, that wasn't a collaboration, but we worked with that brewery and we talked to them and etc. and learned those things. It's a really nice factor. I remember a few years ago, we did a collab with Harbour. Again, this was pre-you, but we agreed on the same recipe, same malt bill, same hops. We used an ale yeast and they used a lager yeast. They brewed it at their place. We brewed it at our place. And the two beers could not have looked more different. They were just completely different things and real different flavor profiles as well. So does yeast bring flavor to beer as well?
Yeah, yeast is a huge part of the flavor. And all sorts. It's like yeast will have an impact on how the beer looks, how the beer feels, how the beer tastes. So yeah, as I was saying, the yeast is basically just turning sugar into alcohol and carbon dioxide. But its pathway to do that goes in all sorts of different directions, and depending on what yeast strain you have, it will favor different routes or produce slightly different things. And so esters is your big thing that you get from yeast. And so if you're fermenting with an ale yeast, you're generally going to get lots of those esters. So you get fruity, pear, apple kind of things coming through. Whereas if you're fermenting with a lager yeast, you're normally going to be much cleaner, although you'll start off getting a bit of, like, the early start of a lager fermentation smells horrible. It smells quite eggy and sulfury and that kind of stuff. Right. But then that all gets blown off and changed and gone away. That lagering storage process is to clean those things up at the start, and then you end up with a really nice clean fermentation profile. You'll get some of that kind of classic kind of like bready kind of things in there, but generally you get a really clean fermentation, and you have way less of those esters. So yeah, your yeast that you choose has an impact on flavor. You can have yeast will have different levels of attenuation as well. So some of them will ferment a lot further than others, or they'll dry the beer up a lot more.
Lovely.
Which is going to change your mouthfeel and how the beer finishes. And again, that's kind of what I was saying in terms of there's some new yeasts which are being found and hybridized and created, which can ferment a lot less, which is part of that low alcohol process. If you have a yeast which can only ferment glucose, for example, then you're if you start with a range of sugars like this, which can ferment, but this much of its glucose, only that much alcohol is going to be produced. Whereas if it can only ferment glucose and maltose, then you get this much fermentation and this much alcohol. And so, yeah, depending on what your yeast can do and its attenuation limits can change how much AVP you're going to get at the end and how dry the beer is going to be too.
That's very cool. Yeah, I didn't realize that. That is very cool. And then Belgian yeast, of course, to get those like banana and clove esters, which we would use in something like White Tips, which is my favorite ever beer. Absolutely love it. But then we also use adjuncts in that with the zests, etc. In fact, any eagle-eyed viewers earlier may have noticed that the zests are on top of the mash tun, and that is a White Tips brew. So let's move on to our last beer in this box here with our last thing to talk about, which is kettle souring, which is a confusing thing for a lot of people, but it's a great tactic for beer. I would say it's very much a modern tactic in sort of relative terms of beer drinking. Sour beer, not for everyone, but I think once you really enjoy a sour beer, it is such a fantastic thing. So with that, the beer in the box is the Cherry Negroni Sour. Darren, our founder, his favorite cocktail is a Negroni, which has led to many a team night out where we all drink Negronis, and therefore we have brewed this beer. And it's wonderful. And
it's quite a big introduction for me on a night out where it gets towards the end of the night and I'm thinking everyone's sort of getting ready to go home, and then so I'm thinking, we'll get my coat, and they go, no, it's Negroni time now, and at the end of the team night out entered Negroni.
Welcome to the team, Jake. A few years ago, me, Darren, and Andy, our marketing manager, were in Liverpool for BeerX. And I am notoriously an early leaver. Like, if I can leave at 10 o'clock, perfect. I want to be in bed. And it was about 12:30 that we left somewhere, and we got back to our sort of Airbnb, and Darren had the key in the lock, and he just turned around to me and Andy and went, "So you want fancy a whiskey?" And I'm just there going, So then we went round to Crazy Pedro's, and there's a very good photo of me sat there and literally like 2:40 in the morning going, I can't do this. But, I'm glad I was out. We were having fun. So let's talk about this beer. Right. Kettle souring. What is kettle souring, Jake?
Yeah, so it could be called a quick sour as well. So yeah, sour beer, traditional sour beer is done by fermenting a beer over a long period of time with wild yeast and bacteria, and that produces those lactic and acetic acids that come through, and that's the sourness you're tasting. Unless you're in Belgium and you've got the luxury of having, well, to be fair, we've got a few mixed ferm barrels as well, but yeah, the amount of time it takes for those kind of beers to get to the point where they're tasting really, really good can be sort of any 2, 3, 5 years, which it doesn't work for everyone. If we want to have a quick sour, the way that we can do it is that we can produce our wort in the same way that we produce a normal beer, and it will then sit in the kettle over the weekend with some lactic acid bacteria. It sits at about 40 degrees, and that lactic acid bacteria will then eat through some of the sugars and do its thing, and produce lactic acid, which is going to drop the pH down and add that nice sort of soft yogurty sort of lemon kind of sourness to it, which is lactic acid. And then so that will happen over the weekend, and then on a Monday morning we'll go in, then start up the kettle and boil that wort as normal, which is going to kill off that lactic acid bacteria that's in there, and then we'll just continue the beer as normal from there. So yeah, go through the boiling process, add hops into the whirlpool, into the fermenter, and then at that point we're going to pitch our yeast, which is then going to go through the normal fermentation process and produce alcohol. And so the production of the lactic acid has happened from from Friday afternoon where we say goodbye to the beer, and over the weekend where we come back on Monday morning.
Nice. It's an acquired taste, sour beer, but I think once you've acquired that taste, it's something you absolutely love. And it's certainly something I love. The story behind this beer, obviously, how do we go around like recreating like something like a Negroni, so loved, so well known. This obviously uses a bunch of different adjuncts as well. As a brewer, like you get given the task of creating a Negroni inspired beer. How would you go about that?
Yeah, so with this one as well, we knew that it needed to be sort of sessionable strength as well. So if you think about a Negroni, it's very alcoholic and very, very bitter. Two of the things that come with that. This one, we can't be at the same alcohol levels, and the bitterness of a Negroni works really well because it's a really short drink.
Yeah.
And this isn't going to be a short drink. It's going to be something we drink in 440 ml cans or in a pint.
Yeah.
And so we can't have that level of bitterness. But one of the things and why they kind of went down a sour route is because you can bring out some of the same aspects that you're going to get from a Negroni through having a sour base.
Yeah.
And so we then wanted to start adding the botanicals and that sort of orange oil, orange zest kind of thing that you get through from a Negroni. So yeah, with this we've added juniper berries into the whirlpool, some licorice root, those things that add in that botanical edge to it. So I don't know if you're getting the same. Like for me, even with the glass sort of away from me on the table, those botanicals are coming through straight away, and that then gives it that you're immediately in that cocktail Negroni sort of space from that aroma.
It has an aroma of gin.
Yeah, exactly that kind of style.
But
and then
less strong, but great.
Yeah, exactly. And that's part of those cues which then start sending you down a cocktail route rather than down a traditional beer route.
Yeah.
And then we put there's some orange zest in there, which then gives you that classic sort of like orange oil sort of thing that you're going to get from a Negroni. And then this also gets some black cherry concentrate or black cherry puree in there as well, which is giving you that color and also that cherry flavor in there. So it's a cool beer. And again, I think it what is it? Is it 4.5%? 4%. I think it packs so much flavor for a beer that's sitting in that ABV.
Yeah, it reminds me of Calypso, and old Siren fans will know all about Calypso. 4% dry hop sour, but this is just a different kind of take on that. But it's just so drinkable, so light, so refreshing, but full of flavor for 4%. And that sort of brings us round. Like ABV obviously brings a lot of different flavors, but then hops bring a lot of flavors, the malt bill brings flavors, yeast, etc. This is like an adjunct heavy flavor, and obviously the sourness flavoring. So many different things and elements that can bring flavor to beer, and it's an incredible world of beer. And for me, the first question we had was, what is craft beer? Tell me a macro brewing company that has this spread. Do you know what I mean? Like you have a Carling or whatever, but tell me a macro brewing company that has this spread of beers. It doesn't exist. And this is what craft beer is. It's this spread from a 4% cocktail inspired beer to like a nitro, imperial stout. It's incredible, isn't it? That's great fun.
Yes, it's awesome. It's awesome. Like if I worked in a macro brewery, my innovation and R&D and that kind of stuff would be, okay, how are we gonna make the foam slightly better, or how are we gonna make this slightly cheaper, or how can we make this slightly faster? And that's cool and exciting to some people in terms of those efficiencies and stuff. But for me, it's totally different. My innovation, R&D, and the stuff I do with the team, they're constantly coming up with ideas and how we can make the beer taste better, or different beers we can make, or different ingredients, and the pure that size of variety is just super, super, super exciting.
Absolutely. All right, Joe, before we go, that's the photo I was talking about, by the way. And you might be able to see the time there. 03:15.
Yeah,
Yeah,
when all the best decisions are made.
that's not me happy. I've 3:15 in the morning. I can promise you that. We're back up in Liverpool in March, so I'm looking forward to that again. Jake, thank you so much for joining us this evening and your insights. I know I've learned a lot. I've got a lot of open beers on the table with me here. Really, really good hearing from you. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, it's great to join. Thanks for inviting me along.
Thank you for anyone who watched this live as well, and hopefully you've enjoyed it if you're watching it in the future as well. So cheers. That is our Tryanuary box. That is our beer school. Go to sirencraftbrew.com. If you are watching this before the end of January, use code TRY20 for 20% off everything on the website on Friday, 31st of January. And if you're watching it before March 29th, then tickets for our 12th anniversary are available now. Cheers, Jake. See you soon, son.
Cheers, Tim. See you, man.
Take care. Cheers.